event in conversation with Lord Johnson CBE. He's told me that I and you are to call him Dominic, but of course the Lords have been very busy recently, and all ministers have been very busy recently. I've actually just come from Downing Street, where there was a press conference on the Rwanda policy. I'll ask a question of the Prime Minister as well on that. I don't think we'll necessarily talk about that today. We'll not put you on the spot on that, Dominic, because there are plenty of other issues.
If you want to, but I think there are
plenty of other issues from the industry side that people want to let us know about. There are about probably 25 people here in the room. They're going to put their hands up and ask questions. But also, if you're watching this online, please do put your question in the question box. And my glamorous assistant Patrick will put it on the screen in front of me, and I will try to take as many questions, sort of a mix of the questions from there. I'm Peter Cardwell. I'm Talk TV's chief political correspondent, also presenter at the station as well, and I do some work as senior counsel for Atticus partners as well. So, Dominic, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It's great to be here. What a great company Atticus is as well, if I may say.
You may say that. It's been a very, very busy week politically, and there's a lot that
people started. It's only on Monday.
Exactly. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about stability, because there's been a lot of business always wants stability. I should say I worked in government for 3.5 years as a special advisor as well, and that was through the tough times of Brexit, and there were so many businesses I spoke to who always said we just want a bit of stability. And I wonder if you could let us know your thoughts on a stable and economic environment to ensure and to encourage a steady flow of business investment for the UK economy. How do we get that, especially in an election year, especially when there is so much uncertainty politically?
Well, actually, I think and I say this, with obviously reservations, because I love hyperbole and ultimately I'm a salesperson, but I think we're the most stable developed economy in the world. And if you look at the political horizon for most countries, including the United States of America, but France, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Italy, the Scandinavian countries, bizarrely enough, they all have a framework changing binary electoral potential outcome, which we don't have in the United Kingdom. Okay, the Conservatives, I think, will run this country substantially better than Labour. I'm happy to answer some of the core questions. It's about character, it's about how you approach capitalism, how you approach the economy, how you approach individual liberties. Regulation, one of my other key areas in relationship to the difference between the Conservative and Labour parties. But we're not going to have a framework-busting potential outcome on the Friday morning after the election. And that's very important. Whereas in America, if you are an investor, we're talking about the IRA. Well, the IRA may not exist on election day +1. If you're looking at investing in France, come the next presidential election, there's a possibility, a highly likely probability, in fact, that there could be a framework-changing event. I'm not saying one is better or the other. The outcomes will be what they are, but they are binary. And we're the only developed country in the world that offers a smooth path of projection going forward in the sense of investment in the UK. And I spend all of my time going around the country. I talk to SNP city leaders, I talk to Labour leaders, I talk to Conservative leaders. Everyone has one thing in common, which is they want investment into the UK. So actually, when I think about how we project our stability and consistency, no other place in the world has got the position that we have in terms of projecting our fundamental framework, obviously with differences and caveats around that. So I'm pretty relaxed when I go around the world. I think I've got a unique selling proposition.
Well, let's talk about that, putting that forward, as you're saying there. What does global Britain mean to you?
Well, a number of things has occurred to me. I don't know if any of you in the audience feel the same way, but the brand of Britain internationally is 10 times better than we think that it is domestically. And I think if you read the press, and we spend a lot of time talking ourselves down. When I travel abroad,
by a managed decline, obviously.
That's absolutely rubbish. Well, I mean, we are one of the top nations in the world when it comes to science and technology. When it comes to financial services, we're the biggest exporter in the world. When it comes to the sustainable energy revolution, we've attracted more investment than any other country in the world. Now, that doesn't. I don't think that sinks in. What does that mean? It means that if you take America, which is a bigger economy by a factor of 10 or 15, we have attracted more greenfield investment in sustainable energy projects than the whole of the United States of America. China, India, these vast behemoth countries are behind us when it comes to attracting these sorts of levels of investment. So for me, global Britain is actually about capitalising on our strengths and being very proud in how we project it and having a powerful foreign and trade policy that sits alongside that. So, we are already global Britain. And when I walk into a foreign government office, I find that most of the people I'm talking to have been at school here or university here. When I go to a Gulf state, I know that we have huge, trading links that go back many hundreds of years in a positive way rather than a negative way. And I feel literally I'm 15 love up compared to my other European neighbours when I'm projecting what Britain has to offer around the world. And the proof of the pudding is in the fact that money's coming here. So let's get with the programme. And I know you're with the programme, which is important. And all of you business, all of us businesses, the lobby groups and trade groups who are here, you've got to go out and talk up the UK. And not allow ourselves to be talked at.
Well, talking up the UK, the Global Investment Summit was a venue where that certainly happened. It happened in Port Palace in November, just a few months ago. 29.5 billion worth of investment, over $1 billion being announced into the Oxford campus and the Ellison Institute of Technology. I mean, what effect do you think that will have on the UK economy? And there are some fears. The Prime Minister is obviously very interested in AI, but has there been too much of a focus on that?
Well, that's a number of different questions there. I don't know if anyone here went to the Hampton Court Summit. It was incredible. I'm sorry you didn't get a ticket. It was only for the top people. So I'm surprised that everyone here was.
Yeah, you were there.
I was there. I was there to hand around the drinks. I mean, I was working. I wouldn't have been invited in my own right. It was amazing actually because we had 250 or so of the top business investors in the world, I should say, as people as well as companies. And it did a number of things. Firstly, it showcased how powerful Britain is. I mean, to announce 30 billion of investments. And by the way, 2 days before, we'd announced 20 billion from the Korean state visits. That's 51 billion in a week. I mean, to put it in context, that's probably what the entirety of France, Spain, Italy, and Germany would raise in investment commitments in the period of 6 months, even a year. So it's phenomenal to project that out. But actually, I used it, and this is important for the people in this audience today, as a mechanism for opening up my colleagues to the issues that businesses face when they're investing in the UK. Because it certainly isn't a perfect scenario out there. There are issues, as many of us discussed in the past, about planning, energy supply, regulation, which is a big bone of contention for many investors. And so having a forum where I can get the most powerful, the most highly thought of, most sophisticated and successful investors in the world to project into my colleagues what the issues are and have them be receptive is really powerful. And everyone was there, desperate to make sure that we construct a framework that is attractive for
It's interesting, just in regard to, I was up Downing Street, as I said this morning, the key pledge, Rishi Sunak, stop the boats. I don't really want to talk about that, but another one of them was, of course, about halving inflation. Now, there's absolutely no doubt that inflation has been slowed substantially. There's a question about interest rates as well. And actually, the former chair of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, recently published a report criticising the Bank of England decision-making in regard to interest rates. Andrew Bailey said he would accept the report in full. Would you like to see the Bank of England go further, making additional reforms, and what should it do on interest rates? It's independent, of course. You're going to say that.
I'm going to say that. You've now reminded me. It is independent. So before I start telling everyone what I think it should do, it's good to be reminded of that. I think it's very important that I think it's easier for politicians, by the way, that the Bank of England is independent. I never really understood why, before Gordon Brown gave it its independence, politicians wanted to have the control over the interest rate because...
Interestingly, not in the 1997 manifesto.
It wasn't in the Labour manifesto.
Not in the Labour manifesto, yeah, that was one of the first things.
It was, yeah. I think it was a very sensible policy decision, and from a political point of view, I think it's a very good thing to do. You don't want to be responsible for changing people's mortgage rates, because surely you're going to bear the brunt of that either way. So keep it independent. I mean, it's to say that it's difficult to set interest rate policy is clearly a bit too simplistic. But at the same time, I mean, I do encourage all our statistical analysis bodies, BR, Bank of England, the Treasury, to try to sort of factor in variable dynamics to their scenario forecasting. And that's what Ben Bernanke said. I mean, I think that, like all things, we all want to hear criticism of our institutions, so it probably got amplified. If you read his report, he made some very sensible comments about the software system. I think it's called Compass or something, which he just said was a bit out of date. Now, I would have thought it probably quite sensible to have an up-to-date software system. I mean, technology's now moved on where we can use AI and new processes to get better forecasting. So, I would encourage them to take, his conclusions. And then, of course, you then have to try to have a forward-looking approach to how you set interest rates. And I firmly believe, and I believe before we had the interest rate spike, that the interest rate spike was going to be temporary, and we should adjust for that as a result. And everyone's concern is that you're too slow on the way in, you're too slow on the way out. So I think we should learn lessons from how we went into this scenario in order to apply them to the post-event. It's not for me to dictate policy, but I think it is sensible to look at that. And I think in terms of sort of the policy direction, if you think that technology is going to have such an enormous effect on how we allocate resources and how we perform functions, so that my fundamental sort of instinct, again, I'm not trying to make a projection as a government minister, but just my personal view, having been in the markets for 30 years, is that we are entering a period of less inflation rather than more inflation. The question is, have we digested the rat? If you think the snake eating a rabbit or a rat, you have a great sort of lump in the stomach, and that's basically what's happened with the inflationary shock.
An arresting that for that.
Went through, and the question: have we digested that?
Yes.
The Ukraine and the COVID sort of capital injection. And I can't tell the answer to that within 6 months or a year, but fundamentally that's gone through the system. And the question is sort of what's next. So we need to make sure that we preempt a deflationary period that could easily follow.
I want to ask you about CBC. They've recently announced they were delisting from the City of London and are moving to Amsterdam. What reforms does the government of the city need to make to ensure they retain their position as the top financial city in Europe, given the competitive environment faced by other in the atmosphere of other European countries?
Yeah, a great question, and I think we should. But Kemi Badenoch gave a great speech. Anyone see the speech she gave last week to the City UK? It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I recommend.
I think some people are struggling to hear you. Sorry. I'm going to move this microphone just over here.
I would hate for them to miss my
It'll be a tragedy. Perhaps you speak slightly.
I will try and speak more loudly and more clearly. There's so much to say there. It all comes out in a great time. Kemi Badenoch gave a great speech last week on the city, and she just talked about the importance of capitalism, the importance of not forgetting how important the city is or financial services are to the UK. And it's often the case one gets complacent. It's just a natural order of how cycles function. So we always have to remain keen in ensuring that our financial services industry is at the front of the world, and it is. We're the biggest exporter of financial services in the world, the second biggest market. So when I think about the markets themselves, the work that the Chancellor's done actually has been enormously powerful. So the Edinburgh reforms, the Mansion House Compact, and actually today I think the FCA announced they were going to effectively scrap a lot of the conditions on MiFID II. These are very sensible and essential things to do, but we need to continue going further. And Kemi was saying that you don't want to have excessive regulation. You want to be very careful about the regulations that you have. As Minister for Better Regulation, although I don't cover financial services, I was pretty surprised by some data. I don't know where it's come from, but apparently I think 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I started in the city, it was one regulator per 7,500 or 10,000. Now it's 1 in 75, one regulator to every 75 people in financial services. So, and I don't think we've got any safer, by the way. So we have to just start being pretty hard on ourselves when it comes to understanding how are we regulating financial services. Are we trying to take all risk out of the system? We have to have risk in the system. That's how you generate return. It's got to be managed risk. How do we assess how stewards behave in terms of managing their, the pension funds on the boards that they sit on? How do we professionalize that actually better? How do we allow financial services companies to flourish and to take risk without at the same time distorting the system itself? So there's actually a lot of work to do, and I do call upon the FCA and the PRA to look very closely at their activities. Are they trying to reduce risk to zero to enable themselves to have a better life? Or are they really putting themselves on the line in order to collaborate with these underlying businesses to grow the industry?
Thank you very much indeed. Just to say, this is an Atticus Partners event. We're talking to Dominic Johnson, Lord Johnson, who is the Minister of State for Investment and the Minister of State for Regulatory Reform in the Department of Business and Trade. I want to take some questions from those people watching and listening at home, but I know there are questions in the audience as well, and I know Luke has one because he cornered me beforehand and asked me if he could ask it, and you can. Off you go.
Thank you, Lord Johnson. This is terrific, and you've spoken magnificently about projection, the importance of projection.
Can you just give us your name and where you're from as well? Sorry, I should have said that.
I'm Luke Douglas-Hume. I'm from a community and interest company called A Future Without Rubbish, where we work in the environmental space. My question is both professional and personal, actually, is bearing in mind that Prime Minister Johnson flew from London to Cornwall, bearing in mind that your Prime Minister now flew from London to Leeds, and bearing in mind that the Prime Minister in between called me a watermelon and said it was a rich person's luxury to worry about the environment. Do you believe, both professionally and personally, that we are in a climate and ecological emergency?
That's great. So a watermelon means you're green on the outside and red on the inside.
Correct.
I like that. What about the pips? Where do they come? I'm a bit puzzled by that. Well, I know you personally in any event. I know you're not a watermelon. I think you're green. I'm not sure you're like a green gauge or a gooseberry, probably green on the inside as well. And it's up to all of us to have a great deal of concern for our natural habitat. I think the principle of harmony is more a conservative philosophy than it's any other party's philosophy, which is being aligned between how we operate within our natural environment. And my growth agenda for the regulators, which is now sort of part of their mandate, is often misconstrued because people say, well, you can't have growth and at the same time protect the environment. But of course, that's total rubbish. In fact, a strong environmental protections are at the essence of economic growth. Otherwise, you totally destroy your basic stock, and you reduce the natural environment that gives power to the area or sense of place where you're in. So you should absolutely be attuned to that. And I think it's up to political leaders to show that leadership in how they operate. Now, prime ministers have to move around. Okay, so it is often more sensible for the agenda that they take a flight or they use a mode of transport that probably isn't as environmentally friendly as other types, because you've got to be efficient about it. And there's no point just making virtue signaling. What we really want.
So shouldn't they lead by example?
They should, but there's sometimes you can't do that. I mean, it's not for me to dictate how the prime minister moves around. But clearly, when I travel, and in fact all ministers, we have to fill in. To be frank, I think it's rather cumbersome because it misses the point. Establish our carbon footprint, work out whether we could have taken alternative forms of transport. And I'm very guilty of this. I'm now flying all around the world to get cash into the UK, and I use a lot of flights. I took 27. I visited 27 countries last year, and I'm aware of that. But I think the money that I'm getting in order to fund the green revolution is worth that. But clearly, those are the sorts of conversations that you need to be having, and I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, how should we move around? How should government ministers use their resources, and what sort of example should the government set when it comes to its green agenda? And the same with AI, which you touched on earlier. How do we use technology better to deploy our resources more effectively? But at the end of the day, this government, and you should be pleased about this, has done a huge amount to promote the clean energy revolution. We're way ahead when it comes to offshore wind. Biggest offshore wind farms in the world. The top 5 are off the coast of the UK. We're way ahead when it comes to carbon capture and hydrogen. And when it comes to sort of getting our grid ready for battery storage and all the other forms of sort of new EV related delivery, I think we're way ahead of most of our European competitors. So we're doing really well. We don't trumpet that enough. I find that quite frustrating. We really have created an extraordinary industry in the UK that is going to provide hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of income, and we don't talk about it enough. So it's not just about how you get to work. It's also about what you're doing when you get there.
And emissions are falling far lower than many other European countries.
It's totally different. Totally different to everywhere else. We're really committed to it. And what's fascinating, because you're fed such a diet of net zero here, you think everyone else must be doing it. But actually, I go to Thailand the other day to talk about their net zero revolution. I don't think they have any wind. I think they've got a bit of onshore wind. They've got no offshore wind, a little bit of solar. They've still got 10 or 15, 20% of coal powering their electricity. I mean, many of these economies are literally just starting today, not 10 years ago.
Although it's interesting with some of those targets, because we've seen the S&P in the last week. I'm sure you're familiar.
Yes, the S&P have been up to all sorts of interesting
Well,
things.
they've had a shocker of sort of 10 days or so. But if we can concentrate on the stuff we can talk about legally, rather than Peter Morrell.
I wasn't talking about.
No, I know you weren't. But no, perhaps not getting into Peter Morrell and his legal troubles. But in terms of net zero, the S&P have said that 2030 is too early for what they want to do. These sort of 75% reduction. There's been a lot of criticism of Rishi Sunak and your government in terms of the fact that targets have been pushed back, but 2050 is still the final destination that they want. Are you confident that that is realistic? Because you're going to be asking a lot of people, a lot of businesses to make a lot of change and sacrifice in a relatively short period of time.
Well, it's what is it, 15 years, 25 years from now.
Sure, but there are obviously deadlines within that.
I think that you have to be quite careful about deadlines. I mean, I think the reality is, and this is what Rishi Sunak was saying, and I personally totally agree with this, is it's going to be a hockey stick rather than a straight line. So the straight line, the journey to net zero can't be a straight line. Firstly, we count on technology and an enormous amount of initial investment. So it's all going to come in the last 5 years, probably 7 years. And we should be aware of that and be quite relaxed about that, because if I take the tone from the previous question, we care about our environment. We feel a sense of emotion about it. And so if we believe that our objective is a good one, it doesn't really matter how we get there or the route we take, in my view, so long as we get there within the shortest possible time frame. So trying to distort that journey is unhealthy and unnecessary. So people who come up with unnecessary targets that are incorrect actually distort your journey and prolong your opportunity of actually reaching the goal that you want to reach. I think also that there has to be buy-in, and I don't know whether governments in general, I'm not talking about this government, I'm just talking about the body politic, has necessarily absorbed or projected the real cost of transitioning our entire energy supply to renewable energy, and why it's a worthwhile investment, because we're creating this amazing new economy. So I love it as an investment minister, but it's a complex journey, and we have to take our citizens with us. This isn't just a question of me telling people what's better for them because I'm a government minister. In fact, if that's the approach we take, and I think in many instances around the net zero ambition, that's the approach that is taken by people in general. We've got to be really careful to make sure people buy into this and that it's affordable, and we're not creating rods for our own back just because we have sort of some PR objective around making us look like we care. I think truly this government cares. We're the first major government to have these ambitions, and we're going to get there. And we should just be sensible about that.
If you have a question for Dominic Johnson, be sure to put it in the question box if you're watching and listening at home. But I'm going to take another one in the room here from the man.
Watching at home. I mean, this is watch WFH is watching from home.
Watching from home, excellent. I'll come to you in a second, but I'm going to come to the man in the front row first.
Thank you, Lord Johnson. First of all, may I say how in awe I am of your work ethic. I follow you on LinkedIn. This is most dizzying, your travels. And we've spoken before about.
Just tell us where you're from.
Sorry, Rupert Gay, the Invest UK, Chairman Invest UK. And the government's focus following the Harrington Review on larger scale investments as being an efficient use of your time and government's time. But could you give your thoughts on smaller size investment? And by that I mean sub £100 million projects and changes that might be made to make that more efficient. And one of the things that we've unearthed as part of our research is that there are 195 inward investment agencies in the UK scattered across the country.
Okay.
I'm sure I can give you the list. And this is confusing for us, but must be even more confusing for international investors looking to know, for example, where to locate. And I'm wondering whether we can apply some of the lessons from the Harrington Review into the smaller scale investments.
Yeah, these are good. These are very good, thoughtful questions. I think the Harrington Review, if those of you don't know what the Harrington Review was, it was a report written by my colleague Richard Harrington about to encourage investment into the UK. So it looked at how we did it, it looked at how other governments do it, and where we could improve. It was a really helpful report, and really it just points towards better coordination, as you've implied, between the different agencies of government, how we give out support that can grants and be some other form of subsidy or support, and then how we project ourselves internationally. And some countries have a special FDI agency like Invest France or Invest Canada or whatever, and they do a very good job. My preference is to stick to our current structure, but make sure we're better coordinated. I didn't realize there were 195 investment agencies. I wonder what I'm doing.
There are 16 in East Anglia.
There are 16 in East Anglia alone. Well, that seems appropriate for such a great area of our nation. Maybe there should be more, but the reality is they're probably local development agencies, if you can call them that, and linked to the councils. And I think they do a good job, because often it's just one or two people who are linking rather than some great operation. And so that would make sense. I mean, I think I've tried to move the department away from volume to value, which is an important transition. So we were measured by how many FDI wins we'd had, but of course, they could be £1 million. Whereas for me, it's about the quantum. So we shifted that, and that's, I think, made a material difference to our approach. But at the same time, we have to be pragmatic. So 100 million for me is quite a big deal, as far as I'm concerned. And I've tried to stop the officials from being too dogmatic about how they apply. I think now they're just sensible. Also, some businesses want to start by investing 50 million with a precursor to invest, 5 billion later on. So it's just taking a common sense approach to it, and then marketing ourselves as one country, but giving the regions an opportunity to compete. I mean, one thing I will say, which is very exciting for many of us here, is levelling up. And I think levelling up often gets a bit confused. People aren't sure necessarily what it is. Is it a government programme? What it really means is the rightful place of other great cities. So the risorgimento of the British regional capital is how I see levelling up. So these cities that were in my childhood, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, and so on and so forth, which I think suffered from decline, from the post-industrial decline, have now come back. And the reason is because the local authorities are so proactive when it comes to enabling investment. So planning, permitting, transport links, they're all absolutely on this. better probably than we are in the southeast of London now, where prices are much higher and it's much harder to get permitting and permissions. So this is a good thing, and that's why I quite like having lots of people around the country helping drive that agenda. But it's got to be coordinated. But at the same time, it's not centrally driven. It's for me to help the investor who wants to build a new gigafactory in Somerset, rather than for me to direct where they should build it, I think.
The Lily in the fourth row.
Hi, thank you, Lord Johnson. My name is Claire Ambrosino from Open Banking Limited. I know that you're familiar with open banking, having worked closely with our former trustee, Dominic Johnson.
Yes.
We spoke about global Britain, global leadership. As you're aware, the government is currently in the middle of designing the framework and the remit for open banking in the UK. We obviously want to maintain that leadership in the world. And in order to do that, the future entity that's going to be in charge will need the remit to promote UK standards globally, internationally. So my question is, how can we make that a reality?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure if I'm in a position to give you a huge amount of detail on that. I'm happy to have a conversation offline about this. But is there anything specifically you want me to be doing?
Well, we obviously want our fintechs to be able to open shop wherever they go in the world and use the same standards that they would use in the UK. That would create investment and growth in the UK. So we're currently in a position of leadership, and we want to maintain that leadership, and being the standard setters would be the perfect opportunity for us to maintain that.
Yeah, no, and I've been doing some work on trying to promote that. I think it's very important. And this is the same for all our standards, by the way. We actually rule the world through our standards as much as we do from anything else. And it's hugely powerful for us. And the principle of global Britain, I think, has come up a few times. And the post-Brexit vision of Britain is an enormously powerful series of trade relationships that we have to be quite bold about go and get. And the new trade agreements are far more services orientated than they are goods and products, which is just how it is. We're 80% services. So that's all fed in. The department's very aware of the need to protect the standards that you've created and to make sure they are projected around the world. So I'm totally behind you. But as I said, I'll happily take up after this what specifically I can do to help.
I'll come to you in a second, but Rory first.
Hi, thanks, Lord Johnson. Thanks, Peter. My name is Rory O'Donnell. I work for the Marshall Group, a defence company in Cambridge.
Sure.
I have two questions. The first is, for the defence sector, the Middle East is one of the largest emerging markets for growth. And I know some in the sector are concerned that the discussion over the potential sale of the Telegraph newspaper to a Middle East-backed consortium and the reaction to that may have a negative impact on attracting investment, both inward investment and export capacity to the Middle East. And I'd like to know your thoughts on that. And the second is more of a personal question. People have asked about global Britain and highlighted the benefits of it. My accent may give away the second half of this question, but the opportunities from the Windsor Framework for Northern Ireland are really important. And do you find that global Britain as a brand is exclusionary to putting forward those advantages of dual market access, or is there a way of promoting it and putting it more in the foreground of our inward investment conversation?
Yeah, well,
global
yes,
UK.
global. Yeah, well, I mean, I think UK just doesn't trip off the tongue as well.
No.
So I mean, when I say Britain, read UK. That's very, very important now, and that's exciting. In Belfast, who's been to Belfast here recently? Hands up if you're at home. You can put your hand up in your pajamas if you're at home and you've been to Belfast recently, because it was amazing. We had a Northern Ireland Investment Summit. It was just a huge success. And what's wonderful about being a salesperson, which is what I see myself as sort of head of sales for the UK, is telling people about something they didn't know about. So I could tell them all about the great universities here and stuff, and they know that. So I'm just re-emphasizing. But when I say Belfast, they're like, sorry, tell me about this. And I suddenly got this amazing little gem, like a magician. I can produce this sort of shiny gem from my pocket because it sits beautifully in the European Union for trading purposes, but within the UK for legal framework and taxation purposes and so on, so administrative purposes. So it's ideal, and you've got a great workforce, two phenomenal universities, and I love selling it. And I've had meetings in my office here in the old Admiralty building in Ian Fleming's office. People would come in, they have the usual conversation about what they want to do, and then I said, "Have you been to Belfast?" And they often, they come from Hong Kong or wherever. They say no, and I say, "Go and have a look." And they've gone that afternoon, and they've made investments, and they've bought properties, and so on. And I always say that if I wasn't doing this job, I would be in Belfast making a business, because I think it's a fantastic place. So we've got that, and we promote it very successfully. There's a great team there, and it's a really You know, for advanced manufacturing, where we're also having a resurgence, which is incredible. You never would have thought it. The UK is going to be the capital of Europe, in my view. Then Belfast could be the capital on top of that capital. So I'm doing my bit. I think that defence is a really interesting area too, and well, there's an understanding now that defence isn't a bad thing to be in inverted commas, morally. Defence is what it means with a capital D. It is defending our way of life, our values, you know, our person, our you know, physical person. And we are world leaders in many areas. And for me, I have a huge amount of time I dedicate to the big, what we call the primes, you know, the sort of BAE systems, and they're phenomenal world leading companies. But actually what's exciting for me, not to say they're not exciting, so I don't want that to be misconstrued, but what I think is really just intriguing is the next layer down of defence companies. And these are drone companies, unmanned submersibles, they are cyber companies. And again, we're leading the way. Places like Belfast, producing extraordinary defence technology that we can sell around the world, which has two benefits. It makes us money, which is a good thing. And it also gives us power and influence, and that's at the core, you know, prosperity agenda for the UK. I'm not going to dodge the question on the Telegraph, but everyone gets very anxious if ministers talk about these things when they're going through judicial reviews. So, you know, I'm not going to go there, but I will say that, you know, our Gulf partners are crucial to the success of the United Kingdom. We work extremely closely with the UAE, with Saudi, with Qatar, with Oman, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Very importantly in terms of our investment agenda, and I want them all to know that we are very much their partner when it comes to encouraging their long-term investment in as many sections of the UK as possible. So that's a message. I hope that people are listening to that, and they know my views are pretty clear on this.
Yes.
And but you know, obviously there are sensitive areas which I will leave to my colleagues to decide.
I want to come to this lady's question in a second, but you work in Ian Fleming's old office.
I do, Jane, and the daughter M is just through, is there as well, and that's as close as I get to James Bond, unfortunately. But it was amazing. He was in there with like 18 other people. It's packed, quite big. It's about this size, all smoking away, devising mechanisms to win the war. And Churchill's office is just above. And
Very cool.
Ian Fleming's father was killed alongside, well, next to Churchill in the First World War. So there was a great affinity there. So in the early days of the war, when it was going very badly for us, again, we think we won the war easily. It was a complete disaster, really, for the first year. He had to go and give Churchill the bad news that how many ships were lost, and he would go up and down the stairs. Amazing history. Come and see it.
The name's Johnson, Dominic Johnson.
Yes, if only.
This lady's been going very patiently.
I think I'm money penny. Yes.
Alibert Khalifa from Bahrain Embassy.
Yeah.
My question is, I think, related a bit for the previous question. It's about Lord Johnson intake on the GCC and UK ongoing free trade negotiations agreement, and do you see it finalized anytime soon?
I mean, I hope so. GCC rocks, and we want to do a trade deal with that grouping, and our relationships, the individual relationships we have, the special, personal, emotional relationship we have invested in countries like Bahrain, are just huge. So yes, we've got to push both sides to move it forward. Ultimately, I've discovered this. I'm not on the trade negotiation side, but it takes political will to close the deal. So you can't let the system will never come to a conclusion. You have two trade negotiation teams, officials, because they're sort of not being good, but they're paid to negotiate. So the process carries on, and there's always another detail to sort of hammer. So you need politicians to sort of swoop in and say, okay, we're going to do it. I think there's a huge amount of collective enthusiasm for a deal on both sides. I give enormous credit to the GCC, which again, for those of you not familiar, it's not as obvious a trading bloc. It's not like the EU. It is genuinely a collective of countries who coming together for common prosperity. So I have great respect for the work they've done in that, and my hope is we keep driving forward. I can't tell you when or where. It's important you get the right deal, otherwise it doesn't work. And my point, projecting the free trade agenda, is it's really important everyone buys in to these concepts, because I think there's still a distrust of free trade, sadly, even in this great nation of ours, even in Parliament. I get a lot of pushback from people who sort of say, well, shouldn't we have less trade? There's too much growth. These are bizarre comments when you think about it, coming from
people say there's too much growth.
Yeah, too much growth. There's too much trade. We don't want to be flooded with lots of things. And I get this a lot from other politicians, people who I would just assume would know that the products are worth it. Because ultimately, You know, our duty as a government, as every government, particularly as a Conservative government, is to give our citizens more choices at better prices. That's a fundamental function of really what all ministers should spend a large portion of their day thinking about. So the free trade agenda is at the cornerstone of that, and doing a GCC trade deal is very much aligned with that. So you know, we push ahead. But thank you for raising that point.
There's still time if you're at home or in your workplace to get questions in.
They haven't been. They're just watching. They're watching Cash in the Attic. They're not typing questions. I'd like to see. I want to see if there is anyone at home. I'd like to see a question just on principle.
There are quite a few people in the room who want questions. There are loads of people who have. I'll go to the back row. I'll come to you in a second. On you in a second. We'll go to the back row. The man with the glasses in the back row. That's you. Yeah.
It's Robin.
From the Building Sites Association. Lord Johnson, you talked about regulation on and off doing it so far. What do you think further changes do we need in regulation to improve UK competitiveness? And do you think this current secondary statutory competition objectives are going to be sufficient to deliver that?
So the objective is the growth mandate, not a competition mandate, which I think is very important. You know, we need innovation, we need investment, and we need economic growth. And every regulator's duty should surely be to encourage that within their universe, but also how they look at it in the broader context. I mean, as a lot of cases, and I've discovered this coming in from outside, the silos in politics, as you know from being a departmental advisor, it's fortress government with each government department, and the same with the regulators. But I look upon our economy as a body. You know, if you go to the doctor, I know you have specialists beneath that, but ultimately it's the whole body that needs to function. You know, the heart, the lungs, the kidneys and stuff. They need to work in concert. So getting regulators to work together better is one very important point. The second is innovation. The system's designed to stop things happening. So you have to go and you have to have it checked and stamped, and it takes months, and everyone's very worried about the risk. Actually, you need to turn it on its head, and you know, you need to have a permissive approach. And if you look at a lot of the work in construction, there needs to be far more self-certification and permission around how you, in my view, how you operate. So regulators need to look at things from the other end of the telescope. Regulators need to be much more transparent about how they report. How are they delivering on the growth mandate? How are they servicing their customer base? How many complaints are they getting? How's their review or appeals process functioning? Currently, they don't really report in a coherent fashion. Some do. By the way, some regulators are excellent. Some have areas where I think they could probably have a different take on things. So I'm not critical of the overall environment, but actually, I do believe in my heart that if you look at the productivity decline in this nation over the last 30 or 40 years, a lot of it has to do with the excess level of regulatory processes that have been put on businesses. So I think it's really important we look at this, not in a negative way. Again, regulation like free trade becomes quite binary. People come up to me in the lobbies and they come right into my face. It's bizarre, and go, well, we want more regulation, not less. And then they walk off like they sort of, or the other way around. They come up to me and they shake me secretly by the hand like it's some sort of, don't tell them. They say, well done, what we're doing on regulation. It's got to be an open conversation. This is technical structures, and this has got to work. We've got to find a regulatory environment that protects us, protects the environment, protects the consumer and the markets, but at the same time enables business. So they should be saying, okay, what can I do today to make the businesses in my universe more successful, more profitable, more innovative, deliver better service to the customer? And what can I do to force that?
Okay, let's go here.
Thank you. Lord Johnson, speaking of discouraging cash in the attic, I'm Chris Holm from Visa.
Yes, quite right. Quick
question. I mean, it's very easy for industry participants to not regulate it, and it's very easy for private sector to sort of moan about what's going on. But be keen to hear from you in your role seeing regulation across a number of sectors. What would be a good example of what you've seen? Has there been something or an initiative recently where you've seen actually that hits the mark in terms of growth, competitiveness, and attracting investment?
Yeah, a really good point. I mean, you can get very anecdotal about these things as well, on the positive and the negative. I think the health and safety executive, I had a very interesting conversation with them recently, and they've moved from a rules-based process to a principles-based process. And actually, the original health and safety legislation, which is 50 years old this year, same age as me, is actually a principles-based, not rules-based. And we became, health and safety sort of mad, and what you couldn't do, and all this stuff, which is kind of counterintuitive against common sense. They've accepted this, and they've said, rightly, your priority as an employer is to make sure your workplace is safe. So, make sure it is, and that's great. People's responsibility. People are responsible. We have an economic incentive to perform well. I think I had a very interesting conversation with the Food Standards Agency the other day. And this is a good example of where government and regulators have to work together. So if you have a newsagent and you sell Twix bars, okay, you still have to have an annual, as I understand it, you know, you have a little fridge of like basically Ginster's pasties or something. You still have to have an annual safety check for all the things that you would if you were Tesco's or a you know, major restaurant, which is again typical of the sorts of things we should be pretty intolerant about. So they've said rightly, we shouldn't have to do that. Frankly, you should never need an inspection of any description. You've got to check that you've got the fridge on, that sort of stuff, and be sensible. But I think that there's parliamentary legislation that's needed in order to change that, because it's been brought in by statute. And so one of the core elements of the sort of better regulation framework is to encourage departments not to use regulations when they can use other mechanisms, because these well-intentioned regulations, you can imagine there was probably an outbreak of food poisoning in a newsagent in Clacton 25 years ago, and Parliament said something must be done, and so a law was brought in, everywhere must be checked, you know, and then of course you catch unintentionally all these other points. So rather than having these very sort of lumpy legislative actions, we should be far more sophisticated about it and make sure that, you know, we can be flexible. And one last point, so, you know, the debanking issue. Again, I don't cover the financial services sector in my white paper, but it's clearly an example of where good-intentioned regulations, i.e., not to have criminals have bank accounts, seems pretty logical, then bounces back because the banks are so frightened of the, you know, attack they'll get from the Daily Mail and the Committee on Banking Supervision or whatever, that it's much easier to say, okay, well, if there's risk, there's no risk, so we'll get rid of it, whoever this charity is, or Nigel Farage or whatever. And that's a real problem, because you're removing common sense from what actually the intention is, which is to have a thriving economy that's well regulated. So there are great examples of people being innovative and sensible, but there are also lots of examples of where boxes need to be checked. And you haven't even got me onto bats, which we can talk about in a bit.
My goodness. I'll come to other questions in the room in a second, but we do have one from.
We have live from the pajamas and Cash in the Attic.
Yes, indeed. Drawn away from Cash in the Attic. Good to hear the investment wins achieved thus far. This person says the UK has joined the CPTPP.
It has. Yes.
Are there plans to join other multilateral trade bodies such as AFCFTA, the African one, or CAEU, the Arab one? Or can you comment on what other bilateral deals are in the mix?
I mean, he's used up all the acronyms I could have probably thought of. And the answer is yes, CPTPP is amazing. It's an 11 trillion economy. And we've got a trade deal for the first time with Malaysia and Brunei, which is huge, actually, for our car industry, really important for Scotch whiskey and other export markets. Malaysia is vital. We didn't have anything with them before. We had some other agreements also. We've come to very sensible agreements on car manufacturing with Malaysia, but also just much more security in terms of how we operate with the CPTPP countries. And if you're cautious on free trade and fearful of global markets, a lot of people are sadly nowadays, actually these are the best ways to get positive change. So if you have a tendency towards trying to protect our environment, it's in those discussion forums that we can actually help drive change, like with deforestation around palm oil. You know, otherwise you'll just never have that conversation. So it's really powerful for more choice and cheaper goods for our citizens. And the opportunity to influence the countries that we've gone into partnership with. I like multilateral trade groups, whatever you want to call them, because sort of you take it or leave it. So CPTPP is attractive from my point of view because you either, you know, you just sign up and that's the end of it, and you can influence from within, rather than these very protected trade negotiations, which I think sometimes can just go on a long time. You know, it's much simpler. And yeah, the answer is yes. I'm not sure. I don't know about those two that were mentioned. We're doing GCC one, hopefully. We're negotiating that at the moment, and we've got numerous other free trade agreement negotiations out at the moment. So more to do.
We've got about 5 minutes left, both of Lord Johnson's time and before escape to the company starts. So perhaps we could take all the questions.
The one I love, the one about the chateau.
I have, yes, indeed. 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to take those 4 questions all at once.
Okay,
and then
I have to write them down. I'll forget.
And if you'd be brief in your questions as well. Man at the back of the glasses.
So Ian Mason, often we talk about trade deals and the emphasis on export. I wonder if you think the UK has an import strategy.
Lydia here.
Jeanette Aquilino from the British Poultry Council, or the trade association for poultry meat producers in the UK, representing some of the largest food businesses, including Two Sisters Food Group. Great to hear you talk about the FSA, because our industry is currently facing a potential regulatory change by the FSA, which will cost businesses and consumers around £80 million and see around 8,000 tonnes of good quality meat go to waste. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts on how we can negotiate some of the opportunities and the tensions around domestic regulations and international and investment.
Okay, two more.
Richard Gardner from Johnson Johnson, a biopharmaceutical company. My question is about UK attractiveness. We've seen indicators around the life sciences sector showing worsening performance of foreign direct investment into the UK, and that results in fewer clinical trials, fewer new treatments coming to patients. What more do you think can be done to join up regulatory and access pathways to ensure that treatments reach patients in the UK with the same timelines versus European countries who are often 3-4 years behind other countries?
Final question, right back where we started. Luke.
I don't assume a chartered environmentalist, environmental consultant, a future without rubbish. Bear in mind today, I think your government has banned the selling of plastic wet wipes. Bear in mind that Deborah Meaden, the great entrepreneur, businesswoman, says she wouldn't ban anything. What would you ban and why?
Or interesting.
Okay, I'm going to leave that one to last. I've got to think about that. I'm not a great fan of it. So really interesting in terms of the imports movement, the ABF. Fascinating that we, the oil business people, so I say this, that we consider outward investments into the country as a win and exports as a win. For some reason, investments out of the country, imports as a loss. And actually, if you read Roger Adam Smith or David Ricardo, you know that actually power is on what you invest out into and what you import. So we should, I've always suggested we should have a minister for imports. And actually, if we've been very clear in the DBT about minimising friction at the borders. We also very passionately believe that international standards are probably nearly always our own. If you're buying a medicine from New Zealand or a food product from Germany, I mean, why do we need to check everything again and do all that stuff? I think that's just our own emotion there. 99 times out of 100, we should just be a bit braver and a bit bolder about the sensible outcomes. So I totally agree. We should have an imports minister. I think that'd be a great idea, and I would volunteer for that. On the poultry side, I didn't know about the specific point you were absolutely delighted to follow. Please do write to me. Please link in with me. If you haven't, I've got a great LinkedIn following, as you've rightly said. I mean, you can see me flying around the world, and I'm here to answer your questions personally. I'm here to serve you. There's no question about it. I'm a public servant. I want to make this country richer, and I want to help your individual issues and make sure that they get properly heard. So come to me directly, message me directly, and I'll make sure you get
perhaps a follow-up conversation with
yes, definitely follow up. I didn't know, but that doesn't sound particularly helpful. I totally agree. Life sciences, just to touch on the last few minutes, the two biggest issues for me, the thing I was most surprised about when I came into this job is how the NHS isn't one organisation. I thought it was. It's about 78 different organisations, and as a result,
and in each different part of the UK as well.
It's astonishingly fragmented, and that's causes huge issues when it comes to servicing it properly. We have issues as people drawing the service because of that. So how procurement functions and how life sciences functions at the core of our success as a nation. And we put a lot more money into the MHRA, which is the testing, the permitting and approval agency, which again needs to move much faster. And so there's more work to be done, but we're very cognizant of the issues behind our life sciences sector, and we're starting to see companies come back to the UK. And actually a lot more investment. So I'm very optimistic, but we're totally uncomplacent about that. And then what would I ban? I didn't realize we banned wet wipes today. I shall not use them this afternoon as I was intending to. And I will think of, I don't like banning things. I think the best thing to do is to create a positive framework that enables people to make sensible choices. And ultimately, at the end of the day, freedom, which I passionately believe in, and is what is the bedrock of capitalism, to protect those freedoms, by the way. It's what leads to the incredible inventions that change our life. So as soon as the more you limit freedom, the more you limit your positive potential outcomes. You limit how high you can fly. So I'm always against the principles of banning. Having said that, public safety and so on is important, and we've got to be careful about how we protect ourselves. And there are probably some activities that we don't realise are so damaging to the environment that quite small nudge changes, such as the plastic bag tax, can actually have quite positive long-term effects. I'm not against it altogether, but I'd rather people have the freedom to choose, which also, by the way, means to say they have the freedom to make bad choices which we also need to accept.
My mother took the plastic bag tax to the nth degree once. The local shop in her village is about 5 minutes from where my parents live. And she got all her groceries, realised that she'd forgotten to bring her plastic bags with her, left them there, walked the 5 minutes home, picked up the bags, went back, picked up the groceries, went back, all to save, 20p, 30p.
Yeah,
and,
it did.
and a
It
bit of
drove her to get some,
environment.
she got some nice exercise, and then
Yeah.
she came up with her £2 bag from Bag for Life.
Excellent. I've been in and around Westminster for 15 years. I've been a journalist for most of that time. I've worked as a special advisor, as I mentioned as well. I have seldom heard a more refreshing and honest discussion with the government minister than we've had here today. I think we've learned a lot. I think he's answered every single question. I see nods from current friends of mine who are former Labour advisors in this room, and I see that you have smiles on your faces as well. So can we please thank Lord Johnson for what I think has been a great session.